Hello tea friends. We thought we would make a video about this new amazing tea, Visuddha, because there's a lot of learning and areas of exploration and cool things to do with this magical tea. Visuddha is the throat chakra in the Indian energetic map of the body, and as you'll see, that's a very apt name for this particular tea. This tea, really above all others, really is plant medicine. Now around here we approach all tea that way, but even if you approach tea really as beverage or hobby, this tea is different. It really kind of falls into the category of medicine, and we'll return to that too. Visuddha is a Liu An tea from Anhui. Liu An is a type of black tea, and I guess that's kind of the place where we have to start. Unfortunately, at least for the foreseeable future, our generation, we're going to have to deal with the issue between black tea and red tea almost every time it comes up, especially because it's important to us. It's not our mission to correct this mistake worldwide. We don't have a ton of agenda or emotion behind it, but it is important for several reasons. The first reason is just to do with your exploration. If you're going to explore tea, you need to know that there are two different genres of tea, black tea and red tea, and that what is in the West called black tea is actually red tea. And so if you call red tea black tea, then what do you call black tea? Also, you might, in your exploration, find yourself in some situation, especially in China, where you say heicha, black tea, and you think you're asking for red tea, but you're not, you're asking for black tea. And you could confuse yourself and confuse others. Second reason is that black tea is called black tea in its place of origin, the place where it grew up, the culture that invented, suckered, and raised this magical type of tea, both of them, red and black. And the mistake was made by a Western colonial society that interacted with its land of birth and made that mistake. So I feel that there's a little bit of an obligation to correct that mistake if you're interested in tea, because it's a colonial one, and because in its land of birth, where it comes from, black tea is called black tea and red tea is called red tea. And the rest of us really should follow that nomenclature because it's the native nomenclature. And finally, this issue does have an emotive impact for the people that produce it, which is another reason that it's important to us. I have spoken to several black tea producers in Guangxi in particular, who were very moved by our attempts in the magazine and videos like this to correct the mistake in the West of calling red tea black tea and then not really having a name for black tea, because their ancestors for many, many generations devoted their lives to producing fine black teas, and in a sense the Western tea drinker doesn't even know about that or has kind of erased that. So in a way, restoring that is like honoring their local tea and local tea traditions and tea culture, and they were moved by our attempt to do so. And so for all these reasons, it's important to us. Of course, I'm not going to, like, if I'm out and some grandmother says, have some black tea, honey, I'm not going to correct her. I'm going to accept that tea with happiness. But if you're going to explore tea, it really is an issue that you should think about and at least understand. So for the purpose of this video, when I say black tea, I'm talking about heicha, what is sometimes called dark tea, to kind of skirt that issue or go around it. But I feel much better just to correct it, and let's align ourselves with the nomenclature of the places where these teas are born and where they come from and the people that have produced them. So Liu An is a black tea. Now the genre of black tea is kind of miscellaneous. All the examples within it don't really have much in common. They're very, very different from each other. There's a lot of black teas produced in Hunan, some in Guangxi, Sichuan, and then Anhui. And they don't really have too much in common. They're all very, very different from each other. What they do share is that they all have some post-production artificial fermentation. By artificial fermentation, I don't mean fake. This is just a translation of Chinese. It's an approximation of what is said in Chinese. The term artificial fermentation is just to distinguish it from natural fermentation, which is aging, which is also very common in many types of tea, including all of the teas in the black tea genre. So distinguishing the induced fermentation, the fermentation that's caused by humans or sped up by humans, by calling it artificial, is just to separate it from the natural fermentation of aging. Artificial fermentation really just means then that the fermentation process was sped up, usually through some form of piling, which is akin to composting. You just need moisture, heat, the pile brings the heat, and the tea begins to break down. But even the method of piling and fermenting post-production is very different in all the different types of black tea. And Liuanti is a spectacular example of that because it is incredibly unique. Traditionally, Liu An tea was first processed in spring, like most teas, in April and May. It's picked and withered and fired and rolled and then dried. But then it goes through a second processing wave in September. And the reason that the second wave happens in September is because during a 1 week period, there's an incredible amount of dew in Anhui. And Liu An tea is literally dewed. It literally, it's verbed, it's dewed. It's put out in the late hours and into the morning, and because you need moisture for the fermentation process, moisture and heat. So the moisture comes from the dew, and then the tea's covered in blankets and piled in that way. And then it's steamed and it's stuffed into baskets. This is a small basket. Traditionally, they were a little bit bigger than this, 250 grams. This is a 100-gram basket. A lot of Liu An tea isn't being produced in a traditional way anymore. It's very labor intensive. And so when it is produced traditionally, it can be a little bit expensive. And so nowadays they're making little 100-gram baskets that are easier to sell because it's a semi-expensive tea. Traditionally the baskets were a little bit bigger, so it would have been dewed and then it's steamed and compressed into these baskets. Tea and bamboo have an ancient relationship, and there's all kinds of ways that they work together, and there's a lot of bamboo packaging in many different types of tea. So then Liu An tea was often then also aged. It also would then go through natural fermentation. And very early on, we don't know when, but very early on, after everything, just before it was compressed into the basket, the stems would be sorted out. Typically, with some teas, the stems would have been sorted out in the initial processing, in the April-May processing, in that kind of early days as the tea's being withered and fired and all of that. That would happen during that time. And there is some sorting of leaves at that time for Liu An, but the stems are left to kind of ride the whole process. And then at the end, these stems were aged on their own because they were viewed as a herbal medicine in traditional Chinese medicine. So they would go through the process just like Liu An tea, only they wouldn't be put in baskets. They would be sold in packets, and those packets would go to Chinese herbal medicine shops instead of to tea shops. In fact, Liu An and Pu'er were both thought to be traditional Chinese medicines. And back in the day, 20, 25 years ago, we used to be able to sometimes find aged Liu An, aged Pu'er in Chinese medicine shops. And that always made us ecstatic because the shop owners of those medicine shops rarely knew that the prices of aged teas were starting to go up. And so they would often sell them for very cheap. So it was a way to find well-aged teas at a very affordable price because the proprietor of the herbal shop wasn't hip to the changes in the aged tea market. Liu An stems were traditionally thought to be a medicine for the throat, which is now you understand why we named this tea Visuda, because it was a throat medicine for all kinds of throat ailments, including teachers who had to speak a lot in lectures, laryngitis, sore throat, etc. It was for soothing that. Now, Visuddha is some early 80s Liu An stems. And with this particular tea, with Liu An tea, if you think that having all stems is like a reduction in quality or a lower grade, you're actually mistaken, because it's more of like a lateral move than it is like a down sorted move, as it would be with almost all other types of tea. The stems of Liu An that were aged and produced as traditional Chinese medicine and then sold in medicine shops, which this one also would have been in a medicine shop at some point. This, I don't know how long it's been in the hands of tea lovers. We certainly bought it from a tea lover, but at some point some tea lover got this from an herbal medicine shop. And the stems of Liu An, they have their own rich, complex palette of flavors, aromas, and energy in the body that is not just a down-sorted version of Liu An tea. So it's not just like the shadow of a really good Liu An. It's actually a different tea with some similar characteristics. Oftentimes stem teas aren't very patient, meaning you can't steep them many times, but this tea is incredibly patient. You can steep it again and again and again. And there's actually a lot of magic that you can do with this tea. First of all, you can brew it gong fu, you can brew it in a side handle pot and have a wonderful experience. You can also, if you really want to bring out the best qualities from Visuddha, you can boil it, because when you boil it, it's really, you can penetrate to the center of those stems. But this tea really is a rich and powerful tea of its own type, as opposed to just like, oh, those are the leftover stems. They are like a shadow that harkens to Liu An tea. No, they were intentionally made this way. They aren't just something left over. They always have been sold separate to the production of Liu An tea. Incidentally, even Liu An tea itself was used in traditional Chinese medicine as well. So the tea itself has a lot of medicinal properties, but the stems are a unique one. And it's a really special and magical tea that we're very lucky to be able to taste. We recommend that if you do get this tea, you try brewing it in many different ways. Try the Gongfu brewing side handle, and especially try boiling it. If you want to learn more about Liu An tea, the March 2017 issue is all about Liu An tea, and that's up for free on our website. And it has a lot of really cool pictures of the processing of Liu An tea, including the dewing process, which I spoke about, and all kinds of other things. It's a really wonderful issue with a lot of history, and goes into Liuanti and talks about all the eras and different production methods, etc. There's a lot to learn in here. And pick up some Visuda. Of course, all the proceeds will go to help build your tea center, Light Meets Life. We thank you for your support, all that you've given, all that you will give. We hope you really enjoy this magical tea, this traditional Chinese medicine, and get a chance to taste a real treasure left from the early 80s. So older than some of us even in this community. Thank you so much.